Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. Chinelo's life was a quiet war fought in silence. Every morning before dawn, she woke up in her cramped corner of the shared one-room apartment she rented with 3 other women in Unconditional. Her mattress was placed on bare cement, close to the rusty window that rattled each time a trailer passed by. Rats scurried across the ceiling at night, and the shared bathroom was always wet and often broken. But Chinelo never complained. She tied her faded scarf, packed her wares, earphones, phone cases, power banks, and stepped out before the streetlights even went off. At just 23, she had learned to navigate Lagos like a soldier, fierce on the outside, but soft enough inside to feel every blow life threw at her. She smiled through insults from customers, ignored catcalls from jobless boys who lined the street, and endured hours standing under the blistering sun. Her shop was a glass cubicle at the edge of a plaza, more like a counter than a store, but it was all she had. It paid her just 22,000 Nigerian nairas monthly, barely enough to eat, pay rent, and send her sick aunt in the village something small. But Chinelo never failed to smile. Even if she had only 1 sachet of water all day, she'd share it with a thirsty child. Her kindness wasn't performative, it was who she was. While others chased customers only when they looked rich or flashy, Chinelo was different. She once gave a power bank on credit to a university student whose phone was dying and needed to call his father for school fees. Another day, she handed her jollof rice to a beggar who sat coughing under a mango tree, not knowing if she'd eat again that day. Her coworkers, Sandra and Chioma, mocked her endlessly. "You dey do Mother Teresa," Sandra would say, smacking gum between her teeth. "Dem go carry last," Chioma would add, tossing her Brazilian wig like she had just dropped a punchline. But Chinelo never cared. To her, doing good was not weakness. It was the only power she had left in a world that ignored the poor. Despite their mockery, she always helped sweep the stall, arranged all the earphones by color and length, and even offered her coworkers sachets of water whenever theirs ran out. She never fought, never shouted, but that peace they mistook for foolishness would later become the thing that defined her. Still, each day was a struggle. She skipped meals often, drank garri without sugar, and walked home some days when her transport money ran out. Her slippers had flattened, her phone screen was cracked, and her blouses were often second-hand donations. But what she lacked in wealth, she carried in dignity. Chinelo never begged, never followed men, and never compromised her values. She saw her coworkers dating married men, entering tinted cars during lunch breaks, and returning with new phones or fresh wigs. But she stayed true. "Let me suffer now," she whispered one night, looking up at the stars from her window. "But let it not be in vain, God." Her dreams were simple, just a little life where she didn't have to count coins to buy rice or pretend to smile when she was aching inside. Yet somehow, through all her trials, she believed. And that belief was her secret strength. It was a Friday afternoon, and the sun burned like vengeance. Chinelo had barely made any sales that day, yet her mood was still light. She had 700 Nigerian nairas left, barely enough for transport and a small dinner of rice and beans. As she sat beside her stall fanning herself with an old magazine, she noticed an elderly man across the road arguing with a food seller. His face was tired, wrinkled, and drenched in sweat. He looked like someone's grandfather who had wandered too far. The woman selling food was shouting at him in Yoruba, waving a POS machine in his face. "No network, no food," she yelled. The old man kept tapping his phone helplessly, apologizing and trembling. People passed by, but no one stopped. Something in Chinelo wouldn't let her ignore him. She crossed the road, asked the woman how much the food cost, and quietly paid the 600 Nigerian nairas without saying a word. The old man looked at her with wide eyes. "My daughter, I didn't mean to," he started. But she smiled and shook her head. "You don't have to explain, sir. It's just food." She helped him sit down and watched him eat like he hadn't in days. He kept blessing her between mouthfuls, his hands trembling as he chewed slowly. Chinelo simply nodded, quietly walked away, her stomach growling, but her soul content. When she returned to her stall, the atmosphere was different. Sandra and Chioma were whispering by the counter, pretending not to look at her. Then the manager, Ikenna, came storming down from his upstairs office. His face was red with anger, and his shirt was half-buttoned. "Chinelo," he barked. "What are you doing using this shop to run prostitution?" Her jaw dropped. "Sir," she whispered, confused. "Don't sir me. I just got a report that you left the shop to meet one old customer across the road and gave him free food. What else are you giving them for free?" He screamed. Sandra smirked behind him. Chioma looked away. Chinelo's hands began to tremble. "Sir, it was just an old man that couldn't pay. You're fired." Ikenna shouted, "Pack your things now." Nonsense. The plaza had gone quiet. Other shop owners had gathered. Chinelo's cheeks burned. "Sir, please." "I've done nothing wrong," she whispered, her voice cracking. But he pushed her aside. "Out," he yelled. Her co-workers pretended to comfort her as she packed her items, but their eyes sparkled with satisfaction. Chinelo walked home in tears that night. She didn't have money for a bike, so she trekked through muddy roads, her nylon bag dragging behind her. The streets felt colder than usual. Her chest ached, not from hunger, but from betrayal. How could helping someone lead to punishment? How could doing right feel so wrong? She kept remembering the old man's grateful eyes, the warmth of his blessing, the peace in her spirit. That was all she had now, no job, no salary, no defense. She got home and cried into her wrapper until she fell asleep. But deep in her heart, something refused to break. "God sees me," she whispered. "They can take my job, but not my soul." She didn't know it yet, but the old man she fed, the one she was punished for helping, was no ordinary man. And the storm that tried to break her was only preparing her for a crown she couldn't yet see. Monday came with empty pockets and a rumbling stomach. Chinelo had nothing left but 2 sachets of garri and an unopened roll of biscuits she had hidden for emergencies. The landlord had already warned her twice about unpaid rent, and the women she shared the apartment with were already whispering. She tried to smile, but even her smile felt heavy. She packed her few wares in a basket and carried them to a new corner of the market where no one knew her. There was no stall, just a slab near the gutter, but it would do. She spread her goods and sat quietly, avoiding eye contact. But even there, she wasn't safe. Around noon, a group of girls selling clothes nearby recognized her and began to gossip loudly. "Nah, she be that girl weigh them sack for flirting with customers," one said. "She 2-day form innocent," another added. Chinelo lowered her eyes. Every whisper felt like a slap. Every laugh felt like a wound. But she sat still, silent, enduring. As the day dragged on, a few kind faces walked past and waved. Some bought small items from her, and she gave them change with trembling hands. But behind the coins, she carried a storm of emotions. She kept thinking of Ikenna, how his eyes burned with entitlement the day he once touched her back when no one was looking. How she slapped his hand away and warned him never to try it again. Maybe this was his revenge. Maybe he had always planned to disgrace her. The thought made her chest tighten. But worse was Sandra and Chioma, the girls she shared water with, stood up for when customers insulted them. They sold her out like she was nothing. That betrayal cut deeper than the sack letter. It made her question everything. Was kindness really worth it? Did doing good always end in pain? The questions sat heavy in her chest, like stones she couldn't swallow. Later that evening, as she packed her things to go home, a frail voice stopped her. "Please, sister, do you have anything to eat?" She turned. It was a ragged-looking man in torn clothes. His beard was wild, his eyes sunken, and his hands dirty. She stared at him for a long moment. She had 500 Nigerian nairas left, the last money in her purse. She looked down at the note, then at the man. He looked like hunger itself. "Take it," she said softly, handing him the money. "Buy something, please." The man's lips trembled. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I'll be fine." And with that, she turned and began the long walk home again, her stomach empty, but her spirit strangely full. She didn't know the man's name, where he came from, or where he would sleep. But in that moment, she gave more than money. She gave dignity. And what she didn't know was that the man she fed was no ordinary beggar. He was watching, listening, remembering. The next morning brought no miracles, only the hum of poverty and the ache of hunger. Chinelo woke up with a dry mouth and an empty stomach. Her head throbbed slightly, but she pulled herself up and dressed in the same faded blouse and skirt she had worn yesterday. The same slippers, now peeling at the sides, clung to her feet as she stepped out. The street was already alive with bus conductors yelling destinations, hawkers clanging bottles, and the sharp scent of roasted plantain floating in the breeze. Chinelo could barely focus on any of it. Her hunger had dulled her senses. She had planned to skip the day and rest her body, but she couldn't afford that luxury. She had to try to sell something, anything, even if it was one charger or earpiece. She set up her small items on a plastic mat near the drainage where other desperate vendors had also gathered. The sun was still rising when she saw him again, the same homeless man she had given her last 500 Nigerian nairas to just days ago. He stood across the street, looking around aimlessly, scratching his beard, holding a torn nylon bag. His clothes hadn't changed, the same oversized shirt with one missing sleeve, the same slippers held together with string. Chinelo watched him for a moment, debating within herself. She had nothing to give. Her purse was empty, but something inside her wouldn't let her look away. She rose quietly, walked over to a small food vendor nearby, and negotiated for 2 wraps of moi and a bottle of water. "I go pay tomorrow," she whispered to the seller, a woman she barely knew. The woman hesitated but nodded, moved by Chinelo's pleading eyes. Chinelo walked over to the man and stretched out the food. "Eat," she said. The man blinked in disbelief. "But you already gave me." "Why?" he asked softly. Chinelo sat beside him on the pavement, ignoring the stares of passers-by. "Because you look like someone nobody sees," she replied. "But I see you." The man looked at her like he hadn't been spoken to in years. Slowly, he opened the wrap and began to eat. That simple act of kindness started something neither of them could explain. He didn't say much, but the way he looked at her, like she was the only human left in a cruel world, said more than words. He asked her name, and she told him. He said his name was Daniel, though his eyes hinted that wasn't the full truth. He thanked her again, not just with his lips, but with silence, the kind of grateful silence only those who have suffered understand. When she returned to her stall, people had already begun whispering. Some laughed at her for feeding a madman. Others mocked her for wasting money on people who can't return it. But Chinelo didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that doing good was never popular. Her stomach was still empty, and her debts were growing, but her heart was full. That night, she walked home hungry again. But unlike the nights before, she smiled. For the first time in days, she had shared something that made another human feel seen, and that was enough. Days turned to weeks, and a strange pattern began to emerge. Daniel, the homeless man, started coming around more frequently. He never begged Chinelo for food or money again, but he would sit near her mat, quietly watching her as she arranged her goods or teased the children who passed by. When customers insulted her or tried to cheat her, he would sometimes speak up in his deep, raspy voice. "Madam, no get change? Come back later," he once growled at a rude woman trying to intimidate Chinelo. She chuckled. "You're my bodyguard now," she teased, and he gave her the faintest smile, one that melted something in her. He didn't talk much, but he listened. When she spoke about her mother's death during childbirth, or how her father disappeared and never returned, he listened. When she cried about being fired, or how she feared her landlord would throw her out soon, he listened. His silence was like a wall she could lean on, quiet, steady, comforting. One afternoon, as she sat under her umbrella trying to hide from the harsh sun, she noticed Daniel pacing restlessly. His shirt was soaked in sweat, and his eyes darted nervously. "Are you okay?" she asked. He hesitated before sitting beside her. "It's hard to be looked at like you're dirt," he whispered. "To be judged by clothes, by smell, by skin." Chinelo said nothing, but she placed her hand gently on his arm. "You're not dirt," she replied. "You're someone that matters." Daniel blinked fast and looked away, as though her words were heavier than he expected. After that day, he began to talk a little more, still guarded, still vague, but more present. He told her he once worked in an office, but left everything behind after a betrayal. He said nothing about family, money, or where he slept. Chinelo never pushed. She didn't care if he was a janitor, an ex-convict, or just someone who'd lost his way. She judged him by how he treated her, with respect, gentleness, and gratitude. And that was enough. But not everyone shared her view. Sandra and Chioma somehow found her again. They had followed whispers, and now stood across the market road with mocking eyes. Aya, from charger seller to beggar wife. Sandra laughed loudly. Madam Mother Teresa. Chioma added, her voice slicing through the air. She day carry madman now oh. Chinelo ignored them, but inside, her throat burned. Daniel stood up quietly and walked away before the scene escalated. Chinelo remained still, tears prickling her eyes, but refusing to fall. Let them laugh, she whispered to herself. They only laugh because they don't understand. That night, Daniel didn't come back. Chinelo waited for hours, watching the street in silence. Something felt missing, like a part of her day had been stolen. But she didn't worry, not yet. Deep down, she trusted that someone who had been through so much wouldn't walk away just because of mockery. She just didn't know how much was already beginning to change behind the curtain of his silence. By the following week, the street had grown more hostile. Word had spread that Chinelo was dating a madman. Children pointed. Adults whispered. Even other vendors stopped buying from her. Some told her plainly, "You're attracting bad luck." Her sales dropped, and her confidence began to waver. One morning, the Market Association's floor manager approached her with a stern face. "People are complaining about your friend," he said. "They say you bring vagrant around, and you're spoiling the image of this place." Chinelo tried to explain that Daniel was harmless, that he never begged or disturbed anyone, but they didn't listen. She was warned that if she brought him again, she would lose her spot. That day, she sat under the sun with her face buried in her hands. She was losing everything, again, because she had chosen compassion over public approval. She cried silently, letting the heat dry her tears before they reached her lips. But the worst was yet to come. On a Tuesday morning, while she was arranging her goods, she noticed Sandra walking through the market with an envelope in her hand. She gave it to the market chairman and whispered something into his ear. Moments later, he stormed toward Chinelo. "You think you can turn this place into a brothel?" he shouted. "What?" Chinelo gasped, confused. "This picture," he held up a badly photoshopped printout, "shows you kissing that homeless man behind one of the stores." Chinelo's mouth fell open. The image was fake, poorly edited, but enough to cause scandal. "This is a lie," she cried. "Someone is trying to ruin me." But no one believed her. People had already judged. "Remove your goods," the chairman shouted. "This is a decent place." Chinelo pleaded. She begged. She even knelt. But they refused to hear her. She was chased away, again disgraced and alone. That evening, she returned to her small room and locked the door behind her. She didn't light her lantern. She didn't remove her shoes. She sat on the floor, holding her knees, and wept, loudly this time. "God, am I cursed?" she cried. "Why does helping others keep ruining me?" Her sobs echoed through the room, waking her neighbor, who banged the wall for her to keep quiet. She bit her lips to stop the noise and wept in silence. But in that darkness, something began to stir in her soul. Not anger, not yet, but resolve. She would not beg. She would not run to any man. And she would not stop helping, no matter the cost. "If this is what it takes to be kind," she whispered through her tears, "then I will suffer for it." She didn't know that the one person she had stood for, the man they mocked, was already working behind the scenes. And the story of the girl they tried to break was only just beginning. It had been 2 weeks since Chinelo was driven out of the market with disgrace hanging like a shadow behind her. She now sold her wares in a small corner near a welding shop, right beside a gutter that often overflowed when it rained. Her mat was barely dry for most of the day, and flies were constant companions. But she didn't stop. Every morning, she knelt beside her worn mattress, whispered a prayer through clenched teeth, and stepped out again. Her body moved with exhaustion, but her eyes still held something the world hadn't crushed: dignity. What she didn't know was that something darker had started brewing behind her back. Ikenna, her former manager, had seen her by chance 2 streets away. His face twisted the moment he saw her, as if remembering a bitter insult. He hadn't forgotten the slap she gave him the day he tried to force himself on her in the back office. He hadn't forgotten how she screamed, "If you touch me again, I'll report you to the police." And now, seeing her still standing, even after losing her job, made his blood boil. Ikenna began visiting her new spot secretly, standing across the road under the shade of a bakery and watching her from afar. He asked questions, paid Aburos to follow her, take pictures, spread rumors. One morning, Chinelo arrived to see her mat half-burnt. Someone had poured petrol and lit a match. She stood there, stunned, staring at the blackened remains of her chargers and the few power banks she had borrowed money to restock. "It must be boys," one man muttered, but Chinelo knew better. The hatred was calculated. The sabotage felt personal. Still, she didn't report it. She simply cleared the mess and started again, placing her remaining goods on the ground, not even bothering with a shade. That day, Daniel reappeared after a long absence. He stood a few feet away, watching her. He looked different. Though he was still dressed in worn clothes, there was something in his posture: alert, aware, angry. Chinelo didn't ask where he had been. She just gave him water and told him to sit. But Daniel had already sensed something was wrong. "Who's after you?" he asked, his voice unusually sharp. "Nobody, Shalit." But Daniel wasn't fooled. Later that evening, as they walked together toward the road, she told him everything: about the burnt mat, the false accusations, Ikenna's threats. He listened quietly, his fists clenched. "He'll regret it," he said softly. Chinelo looked at him, puzzled. "No, please. I don't want trouble," she whispered. But Daniel shook his head. "It's not trouble. It's justice." She had no idea what he meant or what he planned to do. But for the first time, she saw something fierce in his eyes, something that made her feel, deep down, that maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. That night, she slept with one sentence echoing in her mind: "He'll regret it." And though she didn't understand how, something in her soul felt like the first domino had just been pushed. The rain came like a vengeance that week, heavy, unrelenting, loud like the heavens themselves were angry. Chinelo sat beneath a broken umbrella, trying to protect her wares from the floodwater creeping toward her legs. Her toes were soaked. Her wrapper clung to her body like a second skin, and her blouse, already thin, was beginning to tear at the sleeves. She hadn't eaten that day. The only thing in her bag was a bottle of warm water and a 200 Nigerian nairas note she had been saving to buy beans and garri later. Customers didn't come when it rained. No one wanted to stop by a muddy road and buy accessories in the storm. But Chinelo stayed because staying meant hope. It meant resistance. It meant she was still fighting, even if no one saw it. Around 4 p.m., she noticed Daniel approaching through the downpour. His clothes were soaked, his hair dripping, but his eyes were calm. He walked slowly, deliberately, and sat beside her under the umbrella without saying a word. They didn't speak for several minutes. They simply sat, side by side, watching the world drown in gray. The thunder cracked above them, but neither flinched. For Chinelo, this silence was holy. It was the first time in weeks that someone simply sat with her without judgment or pity. Daniel reached into his torn bag and brought out roasted corn wrapped in old newspaper. He broke it in two and gave her the bigger piece. She hesitated, then took it. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's all I have," he replied. She smiled. "It's enough." They ate in silence, the rhythm of the rain, their only music. Chinelo looked at him closely. His face was tired, but his eyes were sharp, like someone who had lived many lives inside one body. She wanted to ask him again where he came from, what he used to be, why he chose to stay in the streets. But she didn't. Instead, she asked something else. "Why haven't you left, Daniel? Why do you keep coming back?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Because the world forgot me, but you didn't." His words pierced her like an arrow. Chinelo swallowed hard. She felt tears forming, but she forced them back. It was strange, in this muddy gutter, under a leaking umbrella, eating half-roasted corn with a man the world called useless. She felt something sacred. She felt seen. She felt valuable. She felt human. As the rain began to slow, they sat there, neither wanting to move. Chinelo leaned her head against the metal pole beside her and whispered, "I've lost everything, Daniel. My job. My dignity. My peace. But somehow, I feel like I gained something too." He didn't answer, but his silence said everything. She didn't know that this very moment, this rain-soaked afternoon of corn and silence, would one day be remembered by the nation as the turning point in a story too beautiful to be planned. And as they walked home in the puddles, Chinelo barefoot, Daniel dragging his wet bag behind him, the sky began to clear. Not just the sky above, but the one inside her. The following day brought the kind of trouble Chinelo feared. A group of boys from a nearby street, young, jobless touts, came by her spot laughing and throwing pebbles at Daniel. "Hey, Oloshi," one of them shouted. "Nah, this madman day, follow our Chinelo." Another mimicked Daniel's walk, dragging his feet and limping like a clown. Chinelo stood up quickly. "Stop that," she shouted, her voice sharp. "Leave him alone." The boys laughed harder. One of them stepped forward, sneering. "You day follow abi? When you see for am? Abina juju he use for you." The words stung. Chinelo's face tightened, but she didn't back down. "If you don't have anything useful to do, walk away," she said. "Before I show you madness myself." The street froze for a moment. Even Daniel looked up in surprise. No one expected the quiet girl who sold phone accessories to talk back like that. The boys hesitated, then hissed and walked away, muttering insults. As soon as they left, Chinelo turned to Daniel. "Don't ever let them make you feel like you're less," she said. "You're not." Daniel looked at her like she had just parted the Red Sea. "Why are you always defending me?" he asked softly. Chinelo sighed. "Because the world already has enough people to throw stones. Someone has to build with the broken pieces." He said nothing, but she could see the way his lips trembled. He wasn't used to being protected. She could tell. Perhaps in his past life, wherever he came from, he had always been the shield, the provider, the strong one. But now, broken and bruised, he needed someone to stand for him. And Chinelo had chosen to be that person. Not because he was handsome or rich, he wasn't. Not because she wanted anything from him, she didn't. But because kindness, to her, wasn't a transaction. It was a calling. Later that evening, she bought him a small bowl of rice and beans with pepper stew. She had to borrow the money from a neighbor, but she didn't mind. As he ate under the mango tree beside her stall, she watched him like a mother would watch her child, not with pity, but with pride. A few people walked by and shook their heads. "See fine girl, wasting her time," they muttered. "She go regret am." But Chinelo didn't flinch. She knew what they didn't. She saw what they couldn't. One day, this man the world called dirt would rise. And whether or not she saw that day, she would be proud to have loved him when he had nothing. Because love, real love, was not built in banquet halls or laced with gold. It was built in muddy gutters, under leaking umbrellas, with roasted corn and borrowed meals. And Chinelo, the girl the world mocked, was building something the world didn't yet understand. Days melted into each other like wax, and Chinelo began to see Daniel not just as the man she fed or defended, but as a quiet anchor in her storm. The more they talked, the more his pain surfaced, in fragments, in sighs, in silence. He never gave full answers, but Chinelo learned how to read the spaces between his words. He once hinted he had worked in an office with glass walls. Another day, he described a house with more rooms than people. But every time she probed deeper, he'd turn away and mutter, "That life is gone." Chinelo never pushed. She respected his wounds. Instead, she filled their time with stories of her own, of her late mother, who taught her to tie wrappers at age 7, of how she used to sell oranges in primary school, of her dreams to own a real store, maybe a tiny place with a signboard that read, "Chinelo's Accessories." Daniel would chuckle and nod. "You'd be a queen behind that counter," he'd say. And somehow, it was enough to make the weight of their poverty feel lighter. One afternoon, Chinelo arrived with nothing but dry garri in a flask. She had no sugar, no milk, just raw survival. When Daniel saw it, he grinned. Aha! Fine girl. Dawn turned to Garri Queen. She burst into laughter, and for the first time in weeks, it echoed through the street like sunlight on broken glass. Better to be a Garri Queen than a hungry princess, she replied. They shared the flask between them, dipping sachet water into the mix and scooping it with plastic spoons. Chinelo laughed when Daniel made faces after each bitter swallow, and he laughed when she called him Mr. No Sugar. They were broke, mocked, and forgotten, yet in that garri there was joy. The kind of joy that comes not from what you have, but who you have beside you. A type of laughter that defied logic. And in that moment, they weren't victims of life anymore. They were survivors, united by pain and softened by grace. But Chinelo's heart still ached. Not because of hunger or exhaustion, but because every time Daniel thanked her, she felt it wasn't enough. "Why do you always look like you owe me something?" she asked him once. He looked up and said, "Because no one has ever given me something without expecting something back." Chinelo didn't respond immediately. She reached into her bag, pulled out a packet of groundnuts she had been saving, and placed it in his hand. "Now eat it and don't say thank you," she commanded. Daniel blinked, stunned. She smiled, leaned back, and said, "Some of us just give because we can." That simple moment pierced him deeper than she knew. For the first time, someone had loved him without condition. No transaction, no expectation, no curiosity about his past. And though Chinelo didn't know it, her name had now been carved into a heart that had long been shut, long before he ever became Daniel. He was no longer just a stranger on the street. He was becoming her story, and she was becoming his redemption. It began like every other day, a dusty morning, a dry sky, and the sound of Chinelo sweeping the small patch of ground where she sold. She had brought a small loaf of bread that day, already sliced in a nylon bag, and a sachet of groundnut to share with Daniel. But when she looked toward the usual spot under the mango tree, he wasn't there. She waited. Hours passed. Still no sign. She asked a nearby food vendor if she'd seen him. "No," the woman said, her voice flat. "Maybe him walk ago another street." Chinelo tried to shake the unease that rose in her chest. Maybe he needed space. Maybe he found another place to rest. But as evening approached and the shadows stretched across the street, she began to worry. Her laughter faded. The bread in her nylon bag remained untouched. For the first time since they met, Daniel had vanished without a word, and her heart refused to calm down. The next day came and went, no sign. Chinelo's routine was hollow. She set up her goods, but her eyes kept drifting toward the empty corner under the tree. People came to buy, but she forgot their change. She didn't smile as usual. She barely spoke. Even the children who used to beg her for sweets avoided her. Something had shifted. By the third day, panic set in. She asked the agros, the roadside hawkers, the old Kiki rider who used to joke with them, but none had seen Daniel. One man said he saw him talking to a well-dressed man in a black car, and then he was gone. Chinelo's blood ran cold. What if someone took him, she whispered. What if he was hurt? Her mind raced with terrible images, accidents, arrests, abductions. And yet, she couldn't report to any police station. What would she say? That a homeless man she fed was missing? They would laugh her out the door. She had no picture, no surname, no clue who he really was. Each day, without Daniel, became heavier than the last. Chinelo found herself walking the streets after closing, peering into alleys and bus parks, scanning every bench and underbridge shelter. She couldn't explain the ache inside her. It wasn't romantic, not exactly. It was something deeper, a connection forged through shared brokenness. She had defended him, fed him, sat with him in silence. Now, she felt like she had lost a limb. On the fifth night, she sat by her bed, holding the packet of groundnut she had meant to give him. She hadn't opened it. She stared at it, tears running freely, not because she was lonely, but because for the first time in her life, someone had seen her, and now he was gone. "Where are you, Daniel?" she whispered to the dark ceiling. "Please, don't disappear like the rest." She didn't know that his disappearance wasn't an end. It was the beginning of a chapter that would shatter every belief she held about herself, about him. and about the life she thought she understood. It was 2 weeks later when it happened. Chinelo was at her usual spot, but her mind wasn't present. Sales had dried up. The boys who used to harass her now ignored her. Even Sandra and Chioma had moved on from mocking her. There was no thrill in bullying someone who didn't react anymore. She was a shell now, functioning but joyless. She had stopped bringing food, stopped singing to herself, stopped waiting for Daniel, until she heard a car engine hum beside her, a sleek, black SUV with tinted glass. She didn't turn. Big cars didn't stop for girls like her. But the door opened, and a man stepped out, clean-shaved, dressed in a navy blue senator outfit, black designer loafers, and a gold wristwatch glinting in the sun. "Chinelo," he said. She froze. The voice was familiar. Slowly she turned. Her eyes widened. Her mouth dropped. She staggered backward. It was Daniel, but not Daniel. The man before her was someone else. Someone powerful. Someone royal. For a long second, neither of them moved. Chinelo stared, unable to form words. Daniel, or whoever he really was, looked her in the eye and said, "My name is Derek. Derek Okonkwo." She blinked fast. The name meant nothing to her. "I'm sorry I disappeared," he continued. "I had to go back to fix things." Her knees gave way, and she nearly fell. He rushed forward, catching her. She trembled in his arms. You lied to me," she stammered, tears pouring uncontrollably. "You're rich." He nodded. "My father owns one of the largest companies in Nigeria. I left because I needed to find someone who would see me without the gold." Chinelo pulled away slowly, still trying to breathe. The pain wasn't in his wealth, it was in the betrayal. She had given him everything: food, defense, respect. And all that time he'd been testing her? "You used me?" she asked. "No," he said softly. "I loved you." The word hit her like a bullet. Loved? How could he say that after hiding everything? Her heart ached with confusion. Was the laughter real? The pain? The silence in the rain? She looked at him again, now standing like a prince in the same street he once sat in rags. A crowd had gathered, whispering. Chinelo could feel her world spinning. "Why now?" she whispered. Derek looked down. "Because everything I own means nothing if you're not in it." Chinelo's hand shook. Her breath hitched. Her eyes darted between his face and the car, and then back to the empty tree where they once sat. She didn't know if she was dreaming. Didn't know if she wanted to scream or run or kiss him. But one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same again. The girl who once gave her last 500 Nigerian nairas to a stranger was now standing before truth that would change everything. And this was only the beginning. Chinelo didn't sleep that night. After Derek's revelation, she had stood like a statue for minutes, her mind spinning in circles. She declined his offer to take her home and walked the entire way in silence, her sandals slapping the ground as if each step was fighting to wake her up from a dream. When she got into her room, she shut the door, sat in the dark, and just stared. It wasn't the wealth that shook her, it was the deception. She had shared her heart with Daniel, fed him, defended him, cried beside him. And now to realize that Daniel was never who he said he was? It felt like every memory had been dressed in a lie. Her mind replayed the corn they ate under the rain, the roasted plantain she once bought him, the day she defended him from street boys. "Why didn't you tell me?" she kept whispering into the dark. Why? Yet, despite the betrayal, her heart ached not from anger, but from confusion. The next morning, Derek came again. This time, he wasn't dressed in a senator outfit. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, trying to shrink back into the Daniel she once knew. But Chinelo wasn't ready. She didn't run to him. She stood with folded arms, her face unreadable. He approached slowly. "I wanted to see your heart," he began. "I grew up in mansions, Chinelo. Girls only loved me when they saw the gates. I stopped believing love was real." She didn't respond. He continued. "I walked away from everything. Changed my name. Slept on the street. I wanted to find someone who would care for me when I had nothing. Someone who would love the man, not the money." Chinelo's throat tightened. She understood the pain of being seen only for what you have, but that didn't excuse the lie. You made me think you were suffering, she whispered. And I was ready to suffer with you. Her voice cracked. Do you know what it cost me to give you my last 500 Nigerian nairas? Derek nodded, his eyes heavy. And that's why I came back. Not to flash cars or gold, but to show you that everything I have, I want to share with the only person who gave me something money couldn't buy. Chinelo's heart twisted. Part of her wanted to hold him, to believe that everything was still real. But another part wasn't sure if she was just another lesson in his test of humanity. I need time, she said finally. Not because I don't feel something, but because what I feel is now buried under too many questions. Derek nodded. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. I'm not Daniel anymore. But I'll be whoever you need. Just don't shut me out forever. Chinelo turned away, blinking back tears. The man who had sat beside her in poverty was now a man of power. But could her heart trust him again? She didn't know. All she knew was that everything had changed, and she needed space to find herself again in the noise of this revelation. Chinelo agreed to meet him a week later, not to reconcile, but to understand. Derek had promised transparency, and she wanted to see his world before deciding if she could still exist in it. When the black SUV arrived, she stepped in quietly, dressed in her best wrapper and blouse. She looked elegant, but modest, the same girl who once stood in muddy corners, only now seated in leather seats. The journey was long, winding through gated estates and security posts until they arrived at the Okonkwo residence, a glass-walled mansion with fountains, gardens, and more staff than Chinelo had seen in her entire life. She stepped out slowly, her sandals sinking into the marbled floor. Derek stood beside her, calm but watchful. This is home, he said. Chinelo remained silent. She wasn't impressed. She was overwhelmed. They walked inside, and everything sparkled. Chandeliers that looked like diamonds, walls of framed awards, art pieces from distant countries. It felt like a palace. And she, a village girl caught in a strange dream. Maids greeted her, bowing slightly. Chinelo felt uncomfortable. She wasn't used to this, the silence, the luxury, the stares. They led her to the sitting room, where everything smelled like imported polish and rich perfume. She sat on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly on her lap. Then came the moment that broke her stillness. A deep, familiar voice called her name from behind. Chinelo. She turned, and her heart stopped. It was the old man, the one she had helped at the food stall, whose bank app had failed. He was dressed in a crisp agbada, his face clean-shaven and radiant. You, she gasped. You're? Yes, he said with a warm smile. I'm Chief Ernest Okonkwo, Derek's father. Chinelo stood abruptly, almost knocking over a vase. I don't understand, she stammered. He walked toward her and gently held her shoulders. You fed me that day when I was treated like a beggar, he said. You didn't know who I was. You didn't even ask. You just paid and walked away. Her mouth trembled. The entire room spun. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I lost my job because of that day, she whispered. They accused me. They said I was sleeping with old men. Chief Ernest's face darkened. I had no idea, he said, visibly shaken. I've thought about that moment every day. Your kindness, your humility, it haunted me. I searched for you, but I didn't know your name. Chinelo shook her head, still stunned. Derek stepped forward, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. She didn't just feed us, Dad. She saved me. Chief Ernest nodded slowly, his eyes moist. Then there's nothing to discuss. This girl is the one. Chinelo collapsed into the chair, overwhelmed. The man she had fed on a rainy day, the stranger she defended, the soul she never asked anything from, was the heir of a billionaire, and his father was the stranger she had helped without expectation. And now, both men stood before her, not just recognizing her, but choosing her. She wept openly, not from pride, not from relief, but from the strange, humbling beauty of a life that had been crushed, only to be rebuilt by love. The next few days were a blur. Chinelo was treated like royalty in a house that once felt like an impossible dream. Chief Ernest took a personal liking to her, Not because she was his son's choice, but because she had shown character even when no one was watching. He listened to her stories like a father who had missed decades of his daughter's life. They would sit in the garden, drinking Zobo and laughing. "Do you know how rare it is to find someone who gives their last without expectation?" he asked her one evening. "That day, at the food stall, I had the money. It was just my app that failed. I wanted to see how people would treat a man who looked helpless. Most ignored me. You didn't. You didn't wait for thanks. You just acted." Chinelo swallowed hard. "I never knew it would come back," she whispered. "I just couldn't walk away." Chief Ernest smiled. "That's exactly why you must never leave this family." The words made her heart swell. She, a girl who once walked barefoot in rain, was now being embraced like a daughter. But Chinelo remained grounded. She didn't let the gold gates change her humility. She still tied her wrapper with precision, still bowed to elders, still helped the maids carry trays when they were overwhelmed. When Derek offered to take her shopping, she asked to go to the market herself. "I want to buy what I can afford, not what you can buy," she said gently. And when plans for their wedding began, she insisted on paying for her own clothes. "I didn't come into your life with my hands stretched out. Let me at least give something, even if small." That humility melted Chief Ernest's heart even more. "This girl is rare," he told his son. "Don't let her slip through your fingers." Derek already knew. He had watched her sleep on the floor of her room, had seen her go hungry for days. And now, to watch her walk through wealth without losing herself, that was more powerful than any diamond. She was his miracle, his redemption, his proof that love without conditions still existed. But not everyone celebrated. Sandra and Chioma caught wind of the news. When a photo leaked of Chinelo standing beside a Rolls-Royce at a private dinner, they nearly choked on their laughter. "Is that not the same street rat?" Chioma hissed. "She must have used jazz," Sandra growled. "They planned something vicious, not for fun, but from deep jealousy. They couldn't stand that the girl they mocked had risen to heights they never dreamed." As Chinelo's joy blossomed, another storm was brewing. But for now, she lived in a moment of peace, with the man who once shared her garri and the father who once watched her feed him in silence. And in that moment, Chinelo knew one thing for certain. Kindness is never wasted. It always finds its way back home. Despite now living within reach of luxury, Chinelo refused to lose her identity in the glitter of wealth. When Derek officially proposed with a modest gold ring, not flashy, not ostentatious, she accepted it not because of the ring, but because of the journey that had shaped their hearts. As wedding preparations began, event planners flooded the Okonkwo residence with catalogs of gowns, lace materials, shoes, and bridal designers from Paris and Dubai. But Chinelo walked into Chief Ernest's office one evening, gently holding an envelope. "Sir," she said softly, "I would like to pay for my own wedding attire." Chief Ernest looked up, confused. "But you're now part of this family," he replied. "Let's take care of everything." She bowed respectfully. "Please allow me. I've already spoken to my tailor. It may not be the most beautiful, but it will be mine. I want to contribute something. I want to honor myself and my journey." Chief Ernest looked at her, deeply moved. After a pause, he nodded. "Then do it, my daughter. Do it your way." True to her word, Chinelo used the small savings she had stashed away from her old sales days, money she once thought would be used to pay off the landlord or fix her broken sandals. She went to a local market, bought affordable but neat fabric, and sat for hours with her trusted tailor, carefully choosing a simple yet elegant design. Her wedding gown wasn't designed by an international stylist, but every stitch told a story of suffering, survival, and grace. She bought beaded slippers instead of heels and borrowed a veil from a neighbor who had gotten married the year before. When the day came to take her measurements, she stood in front of the mirror with tears in her eyes. "So this is what it means to rise," she whispered. "Not by becoming someone else, but by being seen for who you've always been." Even her friends from the streets, who once mocked her, began to whisper in awe. "She never changed," they said. "She never forgot where she came from." Derek was stunned when he saw the final attire. "You're breathtaking," he whispered. Chinelo smiled. "It's not the cloth. It's the heart inside it." He took her hand and kissed it gently. "You've redefined what love means to me." Meanwhile, the staff in the mansion, the chefs, gardeners, drivers, and cleaners, had grown deeply fond of her. They often gathered to sing songs of praise when she passed by. "Madam no day form," they'd say. "She day greet, she day help." One even confessed that Chinelo had secretly paid for his daughter's WEC form the previous week. Chief Ernest couldn't help but marvel. "We wanted a wife for our son," he told his board members. "But God gave us a daughter instead." In that atmosphere of genuine admiration and deep respect, Chinelo's wedding planning moved forward, not as a display of wealth, but as a celebration of a soul that had triumphed through the fire and refused to become gold-plated, because she had always been pure gold inside. Just when Chinelo thought she had stepped into her season of rest, the ghosts of her past began to stir. Sandra and Chioma, furious at the news of her engagement, went into action. With access to old photos and scraps of videos from when they worked together, they began crafting a malicious plot. They used AI editing tools to create altered images of Chinelo supposedly kissing an older man in the corner of the shop. They combined voice overlays with fabricated chat messages that made it seem like Chinelo had been involved in transactional relationships with multiple men. "Let's see if she still wears white on that wedding day," Chioma sneered, emailing the folder of forged content to gossip blogs and even to the company email of the Okonkwo family's PR team. Within hours, whispers began in elite circles. Some socialites who had been invited to the wedding began to decline. "Isn't that the girl who used to sell herself in the market?" one woman asked her friend at a brunch. "I heard she tricked the family with fake tears." The real blow came when the folder landed on Chief Ernest's desk. Derek walked into his father's study that night and saw the laptop open, with Chinelo's face plastered across faked screenshots. "What is this?" Chief Ernest asked, his tone low and deadly. Derek looked at the images and immediately felt his blood rise. "These are fake," he snapped. "I know her. This isn't real." But Chief Ernest was a businessman, cautious, measured. "We need to investigate this before it spirals. If this is false, we'll bury it. But if even a portion is true, son, we cannot afford scandal." Derek's eyes darkened. "Then investigate. Do it. But when the truth comes out, I want their names. All of them." Meanwhile, Chinelo remained unaware. She was preparing soup for the staff with the cooks when she noticed something odd: the quiet stares, the way one maid avoided eye contact. She sensed something but didn't press. She had learned long ago that when storms come, they announce themselves quietly. Later that evening, Derek came to her room and sat beside her on the floor. "Something has happened," he said. She looked up, concerned. "Tell me." He explained everything: the photos, the videos, the emails. Chinelo froze. "They're trying to destroy me again," she whispered. Her hands trembled as her past failures, her old shame, came crashing down again. "After everything I've survived," she trailed off. Derek held her hand. "You don't have to explain anything to me. I know you. But my father has to investigate. It's not doubt. It's protocol." Chinelo swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. "I can't go through this again," she whispered. "I don't know if I have the strength this time." Derek leaned closer. "Then let me be your strength. I'm not going anywhere." But inside, Chinelo knew this wasn't about just surviving anymore. This was about defending the dignity she had fought so long to protect. The war wasn't over, and this time she wasn't facing it with hunger alone. She was facing it with the truth. The investigation began swiftly. Chief Ernest hired a private cyber forensics firm to analyze every image and video. While he never treated Chinelo with disrespect during the process, his demeanor turned colder, not out of malice, but from the weight of what the family name carried. Meanwhile, Derek stood like a shield beside Chinelo through it all. He called meetings, spoke with his father's legal team, and even threatened lawsuits if her name was smeared publicly without proof. Chinelo, however, retreated into silence. She didn't attend planning meetings anymore. She didn't laugh with the staff. She stayed mostly in her room, praying. Not begging for favor, but asking for vindication. "God," she whispered each night, If this is the price of love, let me pay it. But please, let the truth speak. She was tired, not physically, but emotionally. The kind of tired that came from repeatedly proving herself in a world that always assumed the worst about women like her. Poor, humble, voiceless. Then the breakthrough came. The cyber team uncovered metadata, revealing that all the images were fabricated. One voice note, supposedly sent by Chinelo, was found to be AI-generated. Even the email headers from the so-called affair thread were traced to a fake Gmail account registered with a cyber cafe in Ikeja, the same area where Chioma and Sandra often hung out. The evidence was overwhelming. Chief Ernest read the report 3 times, each time slower than the last. Finally, he sighed and leaned back. She is innocent, he said. More than innocent, she is righteous. Derek grabbed the report and ran straight to Chinelo's room. He burst in, panting, smiling, tears in his eyes. They were caught, he said. You're free. The evidence is ironclad. Chinelo didn't react at first. She stared at him, processing. Then she dropped to her knees and cried, not out of relief, but exhaustion. Thank you, she whispered. Not for clearing my name, but for believing in me when I couldn't even believe in myself. The news spread fast. The same circles that doubted her began to retract. Apologies flooded in. Invitations resumed. Sandra and Chioma were arrested for cyberbullying, defamation, and identity manipulation. Chinelo chose not to press further charges. Let their punishment be knowing they couldn't stop me, she told Derek. The wedding plans resumed, but this time with a deeper reverence. The vendors treated her like royalty. The staff walked taller around her. Even the media began to call her the street girl who defied the lie. But Chinelo didn't smile for the cameras. She smiled for the journey, the alleyways, the rain, the garri, the corn, and most of all, for Daniel, the man she once fed when she had nothing, and who now stood beside her as the man who had given her everything. Her dignity restored, her love proven. Chinelo knew that though many had tried to soil her story, the truth had eyes, and it never stays blind forever. The wedding day dawned with the sky painted in gentle gold, as if the heavens themselves had decided to bless the union. The Okonkwo mansion buzzed with activity. Decorators moving swiftly, chefs preparing trays of delicacies, and staff aligning chairs with meticulous precision. But amid all the glitz and attention, Chinelo sat quietly in a modest room at the back of the compound, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her gown, simple ivory with hand-sewn bead patterns from her trusted local tailor, fit her like a second skin, not because it was expensive, but because it carried her story. Her hair was braided in a traditional updo, adorned with white roses and a light veil that floated like whispers behind her. She had no makeup artist from abroad, no imported tiara, just herself, in her truth, in her purity. A maid entered to escort her, but Chinelo held up a finger. "Give me a moment," she said. Alone again, she bowed her head. "God, thank you for walking with me when everyone walked away." Meanwhile, Derek stood at the altar in his well-fitted white igbada, his heart pounding. The hall had filled with dignitaries, family members, and even those who once doubted the bride. Chief Ernest, seated at the front, wore a proud grin as he whispered to his friend, "This is not just a wedding, it's justice wearing white." But not everyone was smiling. A few socialites who had earlier mocked Chinelo sat stiffly, unable to reconcile their previous disdain with the elegance before them. The crowd hushed as the wedding music began, not the usual European symphony, but a soft blend of Igbo drums and violins. Then the doors opened. Chinelo stepped in, and a collective gasp echoed through the room. She didn't glide in like a queen showing off her riches. She walked in like a survivor stepping into peace. Every step she took down the aisle was a step away from betrayal, poverty, and rejection. Derek's eyes filled with tears. He had never seen her look more radiant, not because of what she wore, but because of what she carried. As she reached him, Derek took her hand, knelt before her, without shame, and looked up. "Before all these people and before God," he said, "I vow this, that I loved you when I had nothing, and I will love you even if everything is taken from me." You didn't marry a billionaire today. You married a man who was broken until you saw him. The hall fell silent. Even Chief Ernest dabbed his eyes. Chinelo raised him gently. And I vow, she said in return, to never forget the street that shaped me, the hunger that humbled me, and the homeless man who taught me that true wealth is not in money, but in love. They embraced, and the crowd erupted into applause. But for Chinelo, it wasn't the claps that mattered. It was the quiet voice in her soul whispering, "You made it." The girl they mocked, the girl they fired, the girl who fed others with her last, was now standing in grace, clothed not in lace, but in purpose. The weeks after the wedding were filled with a quiet kind of celebration, not just from well-wishers, but from people on the streets, market women, and security guards who remembered the girl who once walked barefoot with dignity. Videos of Chinelo's wedding speech went viral, not because of glamour, but because of her sincerity. In interviews, she never played the victim. "I am not lucky," she said once. "I am loved. And sometimes that's the rarest thing in this world." She and Derek refused to move into the main mansion. Instead, they chose a simpler house within the estate, where Chinelo opened a foundationless shop, a real one this time, called Graced Hands, selling affordable tech accessories and training young girls in business. "They told me I was wasting my time being good," she once told her apprentices. "But see where kindness brought me." Her former coworkers, including the ones who betrayed her, watched her from afar. Some tried to reach out, others sent apologies. Chinelo forgave them, but she never invited them back into her circle. One morning, as she stepped out to hand food packs to children at the gate, an elderly man walked up to her, frail, shaking, barely standing. "You may not remember me," he said, "but you once gave me food when no one else would." Chinelo smiled and held his hand. "I remember," she said softly. "You were the one with the wounded foot." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "You told me that day that even if you had nothing, you still had enough to share. That day changed me." She called her driver and had him taken to a nearby clinic, covering the cost of his treatment. As she stood at the gate watching the car drive off, she felt it again. That same peace she had felt under the mango tree the day she shared roasted corn in the rain. This was her wealth. Not the marble floors, not the imported clothes, but the echo of her mother's voice in her soul saying, "Give, even if it's your last." And on the one-year anniversary of her wedding, Chinelo stood before a group of young girls, her eyes full of fire. "They will laugh at your goodness. They will try to bury your kindness. But if you hold on, your light will rise," she said. Derek stood in the back, smiling. The man once called Daniel, now proud to be Chinelo's husband more than Chief Ernest's heir. And somewhere in the corner of her shop, in a frame, was a picture of her old mat, the one she used to sit on beside the gutter. Below it were the words, "Never forget where God found you." Because in a world where money makes noise, Chinelo had spoken through silence, through hunger, through love. And that was why, in the end, she was not just the girl who fed a billionaire. She was the woman who taught a billionaire what it truly meant to be rich. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.